Hey nerds, just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber versus Movies, the show where two movies fight and we pick a winner. Okay, so before we get started, there's two things we always say. We're going to do it a little bit quicker each time because I think everybody's starting to get the point. One, we use a rubric when we do our movie scoring. It pushes us to be as objective as possible when watching and scoring the movies on the show, leading to sometimes surprising results, as we've seen in the past. Second thing, we don't watch the movies, we don't show the movies to you. That's a little bit too expensive for us. We will show you clips, show you trailers, things like that. We encourage everybody to go find these movies, watch them, see what you think of them. Okay, on to today's show. Let's start with our theme, counting.
Yeah, the numbers and titles.
The connection may be tenuous, as you'll see, but sometimes that's how we roll here. So we're going to reveal today's movies. First, The Fifth Element, and second, The Sixth Day. So there they are, 5th and 6th, 5 and 6, because numbers, I guess, I don't know. Let's just talk about the two movies.
Okay.
First up, The Fifth Element, released in 1997. This is a Luc Besson joint, through and through. He does the writing, he does the directing. Besson is best known for this movie, along with several other significant franchises for which he served as some combo of writer, producer, director, usually at least 2 out of those 3. Those include La Femme Nikita, Leon the Professional, Ong Bak, the Transporter series, the Taken series, this, of course, later on Valerian and the City of a Thousand something or others, I forget. Anyway, a lot of other movies, widely varying degrees of success and acclaim. He started working on this story when he was 16 years old. Finally got to make it at 38 after he had gained some filmmaking credentials on some of the other things we mentioned throughout the 80s and 90s. So Besson is the main creative element here, so to speak. But let's talk about the cast because it's a pretty good cast. It's a great cast, actually. We'll start with Bruce Willis, former Hollywood A-lister, mainly known for action roles like Die Hard, who has in recent years made a habit of doing a lot of direct-to-DVD movies 2 or 3 times per year for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't talk about that. Well, actually, maybe we will talk about it at some point. But here he plays Corbin Dallas, the main protagonist, sci-fi cabbie, former military man, called back for one last job. Next up, of course, is Mila Jovovich as Lilu Menai Lektariba Lamina Tachai Ekpat de Sabat, or just Lilu.
Rolls off the tongue.
Jovovich is known for doing action roles like Ultraviolet, the Resident Evil movies, many others. Her movies are usually not well regarded, but she's a very charismatic performer, and Lilu was her main jumping off point. She did some things before this. She did this movie when she was 22, and that was her main jump into real stardom. The villain, Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, or just Zorg, is none other than Gary Oldman doing his very best nervous, twitchy Gary Oldman impression. Do we have to review Oldman's background? I mean, he's fantastic in everything that he does, and maybe we'll just stick to that. So after Ash, before Bilbo, the venerable Ian Holm played priest Vito Cornelius in this movie. He's a believer in the prophecy that is of the Fifth Element. And then rounding out the main cast, there's Fridays. Maybe next time we should do like Days of the Week. Maybe Colors, maybe Letters, who knows. Anyway, Friday's Chris Tucker is here, going way over the top, practically into orbit as a famous DJ-type character Ruby Rhod. There's a lot of other fun casting here beyond the main cast. Keep an eye out for Luke Perry, Brian James, Tim Tiny Lester, and Lee Evans along the way. The Fifth Element was actually a big box office hit. It's in its day, as you'll soon see. Nevertheless, it still kind of floats under the radar as a cult film with a very specific fan base, including me. This is probably due to its very European roots and aesthetic. It's very inspired by European sci-fi comics, like the type of thing you might find in old issues of Heavy Metal, 2000 AD. Specifically, the artist Mobius actually worked as a concept designer for the film, and you definitely see that in every single frame of the movie.
Yeah.
The movie didn't have a huge pop culture footprint, even though it made a lot of money. There were 2 video games and a novel adaptation, and that's about it. And despite the financial success, Besson has said no to the idea of a sequel. That's actually kind of refreshing in some ways, because this was obviously something that could have spurned a franchise, or spawned a franchise, that is.
Right.
So that's The Fifth Element. Next up is The Sixth Day with the Austrian oak himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was released in 2000s. It's one of Schwarzenegger's last pre-Governator roles. I think Collateral Damage came after this, but this was pretty close to the end of that era. The writers are the Wibberleys, Cormac and Marianne, a husband and wife writing team getting their start here. After this, they would work on the National Treasure movies, a Charlie's Angels sequel, one of the Bad Boys sequels, and some kid stuff like G-Force, that is, and the remake of The Shaggy Dog. Director credit goes to the ever-competent Roger Spottiswoode. Not a very widely known name, but he has a fairly extensive Hollywood resume. It features things like Turner and Hooch, Air America. Tomorrow Never Dies is a big one.
Right.
We won't mention Stop or My Mom Will Shoot here today, will we? We don't talk about Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Probably shouldn't.
So the main creative element here is not necessarily a dream team, but we do have another good cast in this movie. First up, obviously, the aforementioned Schwarzenegger, former 7-time Mr. Olympia, Conan, Predator, Terminator, Total Recall, many more. Arguably the top Hollywood action star of the 80s and 90s. I know Stallone might have something to say about that, but, they're neck and neck. I don't think he really needs me or anybody else to validate his accolades. Here he plays cloned, confused, and very American-named protagonist Adam Gibson. Next up, Michael Rappaport plays Adam's best buddy Hank. We have Tony Goldwyn as the villainous Drucker. There's Michael Rooker is in this actually too. He plays the henchman leader Marshall. Then we have Terry Crews, actually in his first film role, debuting as just another henchman named Bansworth. And then Sarah Winter plays the assassin Talia, and Wendy Crewson plays Adam Gibson's wife. So that's the main cast. Oh, don't forget, actually, none other than Hollywood legend himself, Robert Duvall, shows up as Dr. Griffin Weir. Now, this movie is largely forgotten in the Schwarzenegger pantheon, and for good reason. Now, our scoring aside, not even taking that into account, the movie was not a hit at all. And considering the marketing, in fact, it probably did not make its money back, as you'll see in a minute. This is actually probably the first of Arnold's movies to do so badly since like the very early 80s when he was still getting vocally dubbed. It has no pop culture footprint. It has no cult following. There were no books. There were no comics. There were no video games. But we're going to remember it on our show today. We're going to give it a fair shake because that's what we do.
That's right.
All right. That's it for the basics of The Fifth Element and The Sixth Day. Next up, Claude will bring out the big board and we'll do the tale of the tape. All right, you may remember, because it was just a moment ago, I said we'd be back with the big board, and we are. So, Claude, take it away.
This board is indeed large, and we are indeed back. So let's look at the tale of the tape for the fifth element and the sixth day, and probably the eighth time. Let's start, as we always do, with the distributing studio. For the first time in the history of this show, both movies have the same one, Columbia Pictures.
History made.
Moving on to the release date, Fifth Element coming out first, May 7th, 1997. And I suppose that puts it in the summer blockbuster category.
Opening the season.
However, October 28th, 2000, for the sixth day, I think technically means they buried it in the fall.
Yeah, not great, not great.
As far as the ratings, both exactly the same, PG-13. Running time, also nearly the same. 125 minutes for the Fifth Element and 124 minutes for the sixth day. And I don't know that you could have two movies with the same running time that seem so different. Budget is where things start to get interesting. They start off with very similar amounts of money. $90 million for the Fifth Element. Which, if you watch it, you'd go, okay, in 1997 money, I could see that. $83 million for the sixth day. You maybe can't see that as easily in 2000 money. But compared to how much they started with versus how much they took in, the Fifth Element made $264 million, as you can see. A bona fide hit. The sixth day made $96 million. Which, as we've talked about off camera, after all considerations are figured and allowed for, it's probably a loss. It doesn't even really break even.
I don't. Some people don't realize that a lot of times in Hollywood, the marketing budget is not included in the production budget. When you factor in marketing, probably a loss.
Which is shocking considering what these movies are and who's starring in them, and what goes behind what's leading into each one.
Yeah.
You just never know, and that's why the tale of the tape is so important to look at.
So there it is, the tale of the tape. We're gonna go watch some movies, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and we're going to do some scoring. We're going to score The Fifth Element first, because 5 comes before 6, because that's our concept today, I guess.
Naturally, yeah.
All right, so I will go first. Here's my board for The Fifth Element. Sky high. I knew coming into this episode that I was going to like The Fifth Element because I like The Fifth Element. Again, this show is an exercise in trying to be objective and not letting emotions take over. But when you start breaking this movie down, it just has so much going for it. So we're starting with visuals. I'm giving it a 9. Not only do the effects look great, even for their time, if you consider it like for their time, or even if you don't put that limitation on it, they still look great. It's a mix. There is CGI in the movie. There's a lot of model work. There are animatronics in the movie. There's special effects makeup going on. Beyond all that, there's also very creative, different, and weird costume design, set dressing. The production design is top-notch.
Yep.
Obviously, this is all Moebius. If you don't know who Moebius is, or Mebius, he is a French comic book artist and illustrator. He, again, as I mentioned earlier, he was brought on as a concept artist for the movie. It's all on screen. It's very weird. It might not be for everybody, but to me, it looks absolutely fantastic and off-the-charts creative. Performances. Mila Jovovich is fantastic as Lilu. Ian Holm is so... I don't want to quite call it bizarre, but he's so energetic as Vito, Cornelius. You have... Chris Tucker obviously is like shooting for the moon. He's chewing the scenery. You can go too far with something like that, but I think within the confines and the context of his character, it actually works.
Yep.
And he's only in really like the third act.
Yeah.
So that also works in the movie's favor, where you don't get overexposed to that. Gary Oldman is giving this very squirrely, bizarre performance as Zorg. And then all the supporting actors are doing exactly what you expect and exactly what they should be doing. Bruce Willis is kind of the straight man in this movie. He's the grounding force. He's the only one who's not really doing something super esoteric, but he's doing something that's very solid, and he's accomplishing what he needs to accomplish in that role. Next up is writing. Again, I don't know if I actually said performances. I'm giving an 8. That's an 8, just for the record. Writing, also an 8. Again, not just the weird, bizarre, creative dialogue, but also the plot, the structure, everything that goes into creating a movie like this. We're going to have aliens that look like this. We're going to have creatures that look like this. We're going to have it in this setting. We're going to switch it. We're going to change it. We're going to be on an astro cruise. We're going to be in a super futuristic 1,000-story high New York City. Everything that this movie has is off the wall, off the charts creative. It's batshit crazy in a lot of ways. Hard to bail on something like that, but I think The Fifth Element does it well. So obviously it's getting very high scores for me. Maybe my highest set of scores on any episode so far.
Well, here's my board, and my scores are very similar. A little lower overall.
It's usually what happens.
We're finally getting to the point where my scores kind of reflect my opinions in reality compared to yours. With the visuals of this movie, I mean, there's no way you can see this and go, yeah, it doesn't deserve a high visual score. It's effects, it's like everything you said, art direction, set design, costume design. everything you look at in this movie is detailed, it is interesting, it is unique, it's well designed, it's creative, and it's technically beautiful.
Agreed.
Everything you'd look for in a movie that is known for visuals. So, while I'm not going to say it's a perfect 10, 8.5 I think is the highest I've given out for visuals in movies so far. And that is something I feel really comfortable doing for The Fifth Element. Performance-wise, it's nearly as high. Again, echoing a lot of your thoughts. Everybody in this movie, first of all, the casting is great. That's the foundation. It's the foundation of any really good performance grouping in a movie. And most movies that are really memorable have to have that. This has it, just at the foundation. But everybody from that foundation seems to have brought their A game. Like you said, Chris Tucker is probably the big standout as far as the amount over the top he goes, the amount of flamboyance, the amount of scenery chewing. But Mila Jovovich as Lilu is great. For me, I think Gary Oldman was a surprise. Not that he's ever not good, or ever not kind of quirky, or ever not really professional, but he just comes across as such a master, even at this stage. And as you said, Bruce Willis is the anchor, kind of holding it down. Writing, as you said, kind of sets everything up. I'm not going to come away with this quoting a lot, throwing out a lot of these, like, meme-worthy lines or anything like that.
Fair.
But, so I mean, I take a few points off for that.
All right.
But no, it's super solid. It's super memorable. Everything has to be set by the writing, like you said, the scene details and the script. Everything came out of somebody's imagination, and it was put on the page.
Yeah.
And when you take that into account with what you're seeing and how it all comes together, it's an achievement.
They did not hold back.
Not at all. Yeah. Somebody's handcuffs were taken off. 8.5, 8, and 7 are my scores for The Fifth Element.
All right, those are some pretty high scores. We're not done yet. We have another movie to watch, and we'll be back with more.
Who are you?
I was hired to kill you.
Open your eyes. Doctor, we're cloned you. Drucker will do anything to destroy the evidence. And you are the evidence. Or you cloned the wrong man.
All right, we're back again with another set of scores. This time, Claude, why don't you go first?
Why don't I? Well, it's the 6th day, and I feel like it's the 11th hour for the 6th day. Because here are my scores, and let's just say they ain't pretty. Very bleak picture being painted here for the 6th day. Starting with the visuals. So far on this show, I think this is probably the ugliest movie we've reviewed. And that isn't a result of locations or like cosmetic ugliness or anything like that. It's more technical. It's more the choice of, I guess, filters. Things like filters, things like lens choices, things like the editing decisions. Just the visual style of this movie is very dated and very cheap for being more modern 3 years after The Fifth Element.
Yep.
For being from the year 2000, the future, it has not aged well. We talked off camera about this being very indicative of its time, and that is what it is. It's also a look that is not something you'd expect from a large budget mainstream Hollywood studio movie. It's very TV level feeling production wise. So 4.5 from me on that. It's a tough watch. Performance is also pretty low. I'm gonna have to go with 5. And you've got major stars. You've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously the centerpiece attraction of this movie. Never known for his acting prowess, but has done fine jobs in plenty of movies before this, and even after. Here, I don't know if it's a result of the director not being able to coax his best material out of him or whatever, but it's not Arnold's best work. Unfortunately, it's also nobody else's best work. Michael Rooker's in this movie. You've seen him in a lot of things. he's got some trademark performance quirks that he does. I feel like he's nothing but performance quirks in this movie, unfortunately. And it is a little bit rough, and it kind of just goes downhill with everybody from there. So, the writing is probably the strongest aspect of this movie. And that is because, as I mentioned while we were watching it, I feel like the idea, the concept of the movie is fairly strong, or could have been fairly strong. In the hands of, I don't know if you replace one element, then it becomes better, but maybe in the hands of a different team entirely. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting concept. It's the idea of people being cloned and replaced and kind of having to fight against it, and it's a mystery, and it's science fiction, and it's a lot of things that are very interesting separate elements. But the way they put them together in this movie, it just falls flat. So I gave it a 6.5 for the strength of the idea and the ambition behind it. But I cannot really go higher than that.
All right, so I'm up with my scores, and here they are. Not pretty. A little bit better than yours.
Yeah.
Definitely my lowest set of scores in the show so far. I agree with a lot of what you said. I came into this expecting to like it a little bit more. I'm a big Arnold fan, not just his movies and acting, also his status as a strength sports icon. This doesn't quite measure up.
Taught you a lesson.
It really did. But again, that's why we do this. This is supposed to be an objective viewpoint. Sometimes you surprise yourself. Visuals, 5. Disappointing, inconsistent, and boring. There's a lot going on here that is the worst of its era. It's very dated in that way.
Right.
Overexposed shots, weird slow motion choices. There's nothing inspiring. Everybody's just wearing khakis and polo shirts. There are some good special effects shots, but then they are contrasted against some special effects shots that don't work at all.
Yeah.
This movie was put out by a major studio with a pretty decent budget. In the year 2000, there's really no excuse for it to be as inconsistent and uninspired as it is. So, pretty low score for visuals. Performance is 6. Everybody's just kind of doing standard work here.
Yeah.
Arnold's not known as some great thespian, as you said, but he's done some good work. After this, he would do a movie called End of Days. Not highly thought of, but good acting on his part. Before this, he did things like Total Recall, where he's pulling it off.
Yeah.
Not so good here. Everybody else is just doing what they need to do. Like you said earlier, Michael Rooker can be very charismatic on screen.
Right.
In this movie, he's kind of uninspired. Robert Duvall looks like he showed up for a weekend. Tony Goldwyn's just doing a smarmy villain, businessman. And even, you have Michael Rappaport, known as this comedian type, and he's not really going for it either.
Very neutered.
So it all just seemed very, again, I keep coming back to the word sterile.
Yeah.
Both as we talk about it here and off camera, and that's just what it seems to me. Writing, 6.5. I agree with you. Some good ideas here. A good foundation, and that's kind of what gives it the credit. It just doesn't push it far enough. It doesn't push it in an interesting enough direction.
No.
It takes some interesting diversions. The clones have built-in illnesses and things like that. And the doctor's wife ends up with cystic fibrosis as a 50-year-old clone. Like, there are interesting pieces, but they don't really, those just end up being tangents that go to nowhere, and it just kind of sticks to a very by-the-numbers. I guess at the time they were probably thinking it was safe, but it just ends up being kind of dull. And that's really the overall vibe I got from the movie, is that it was just kind of dull. Neutered. You said neutered, and that's another good word for it. So, a pretty low set of scores for me, my lowest so far. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do some arithmetic. We'll be back again. We'll get the big board back out, and we'll do some final calculations. So, we'll be back in just a moment. All right. As I said, the big board is back, and the final scores are in. An interesting development. The Fifth Element, 8.05. That makes it our highest scoring movie ever so far. Surpassing some really good movies that I like a lot, and I know that you like a lot as well.
Yeah.
So we have our highest ever score, and the sixth day with a score of 5.55 is our lowest scoring movie so far on the show. So I didn't necessarily think that we'd have the highest and the lowest.
No.
But these two movies right now represent the current spectrum of the show so far.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Any final thoughts, Claude?
I am equally surprised. This sort of started this idea to pair these two movies as kind of a throwaway joke about numbers. Movies with numbers in the title.
that are in a row, 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Tee-hee.
Yeah. And yet together they have taught us some things about our preferences, about again, the way we do the scores here continues to give us just insight into what we like in movies and kind of how you view a movie. Before this, I had seen The Fifth Element once, like 20 years ago, and wasn't really that enthused by it. And, seeing it now again, having a new appreciation, I mean, it scored very high, as we showed you, and now it is the official highest scoring movie on this channel.
I have been a big fan of The Fifth Element for a long time. I expected high scores. Doing things objectively backed up that expectation. The Sixth Day, kind of the other direction that you just took on The Fifth Element. Sixth Day, for me, I came in, hey, I like this movie. It's an Arnold movie. It's a good sci-fi action movie. And you get interesting results. So there you have it. The Fifth Element wins today on a big win. The Fifth Element is also the clubhouse leader. And The Sixth Day is bringing up the rear. Any final thoughts?
I had never seen The Sixth Day before today. And I don't think I ever will again.
I think this might be the end of the road on that one for me, too.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess that does it for this episode of Nerd Bomber vs. Movies. You can find us here on YouTube. Obviously, you already have. We also do a podcast, the Nerd Bomber Podcast. The easiest way to find us is on Instagram at Nerd Bomber Pod. There you can find links to everything we do, both independently and together. For your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
Aloha.
Please deposit litter in trash receptacles as you exit the auditorium. The perfect gift for any occasion, gift certificates are available at the box office. Please don't talk during the movie. Thanks for visiting with us. Buckle up and drive safely. See you next week.